culture looks at marriage, it's a very negative view, isn't it? And you also look at the reality is that marriage is full of pitfalls. It's treacherous territory. I just want to tell you. It is a wonderful adventure, but it is dangerous territory. There are all sorts of things that can happen. And I want to talk to you, I want to prepare you for that, guys. I want you to think seriously about the fact that when you step into marriage, a lot of times when you step in, well, let me give you this. I have to tell you this thing I read this morning. It's an Arab proverb about marriage. It says that marriage begins with a prince kissing an angel. And it ends with a bald man looking across the table at a fat lady. Blame the Arabs, they said that, I didn't. So there's all kind of things that reminds me of Fred and Irma. Fred and Irma got married. They celebrated 50 years of marriage. And after they had this big anniversary, and everybody came. They threw a big party at their house and all that kind of stuff. And so Fred and Irma go out on the front porch about halfway through the party. They're kind of tired of all the crowd, so they go sit in their rockers and they look out over the horizon. And Irma looks over at Fred and says, "Fred, I admire you." Fred says, "What?" She said, Irma said, "I admire you." He said, "What?" She said, "I admire you." And he looked over at her and said, "I'm tired of you too." Like I said, communication can be tough, isn't it, Henrietta? But things happen. I want to read to you about a story about a couple that they got married, had all sorts of expectations. No doubt they had tremendous expectations, but there was one big thing in their life that never quite worked out. And it must have been difficult. Look with me in your Bible, Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1. You'll be familiar with this story if you've read much of the Bible. If you haven't, it's a pretty simple story, easy to remember. It's before Jesus is born, very beginning of Luke's gospel. God is preparing the way. He's putting things together in order to bring His Son into the world, to save the world from our sin. And so there's this couple in verse 5 of chapter 1. It says this: "In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth." Now guys, this was a marriage made in heaven. They were both from priestly families. And they were, you would have thought, this is perfect. She was from the daughters of Aaron. Aaron was the first priest of Israel, and his descendants were to be the priests. And Zechariah was also of the tribe of Levi, and so he was from that tribe. And so you have this perfect couple coming together. And I don't know how many of you have really thought about how you want to, some of you who aren't married at this point in your life, maybe you're thinking about who's that person that I want to be with. Who does God have for me? A match made in heaven. Marriage is a match made in heaven. But so is thunder and lightning. So don't get too excited about that. But that's supposed to be funny. You're supposed to laugh at that point. But this was perfect. Perfect. Now, for a Hebrew family, the thing is to get married, to begin life, to set up a household, and to have children. The sign of truly being blessed was to have children. And so no doubt, Betty and Zach, when they got married, and they settled down, and they began to get involved in the priestly duties of running the temple. This was a wonderful ministered couple, and they followed the laws of God, and they were dedicated to the things of God. And so, every day, Zechariah would go to the temple, and he would perform his duties, and Betty would take care of the home, and she would do the things that were expected of a Hebrew mother. And then, and they kept dreaming of this one thing, those first children they would ever have. Maybe they dreamed of lots of children. I wonder how many of you couples, when you start thinking about getting married, you think, now how many kids do I want to have? Hopefully you can come to a number you both feel good about. If one wants 24 kids and the other wants 2, you might have something to discuss. But sometimes those kind of things come up, don't they? Well, in any case, they wanted to have children. They wanted to have children. But that didn't happen. Look at the next verse. It says to us in verse 6, They were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. This was the cream of the crop. Guys, this was a good couple. These were the kind of people you would want to live next door to. These were the kind of people that would be nominated for all the community service awards. They were the best of the best. And you'd want to hang out with these folks. Verse 7, but they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. Guys, what a sad story. I wonder how many people talked about that poor old couple over there, Betty and Zach. Salt of the earth, wonderful people, loved God, loved the people around them, and they never were able to have children. Why would God allow this woman to be barren? You know, in the Bible, in those days, it was considered a curse of God to be barren. That people thought automatically there must be something wrong with you. You must have done something, or your parents must have done something. There must be some divine reason why God would make you to be a barren woman. And so you could see how this must have been a terribly disappointing time in their life, because this was humiliating. This was humiliating. It still is. It still is. And a lot of you young mothers are thinking, I want to have children, and someday I want to have children, and I think maybe you worry, what if I don't? What if that doesn't happen? And that's a very real fear, because that is such an important part of life and part of family and motherhood and parenthood. And so can you imagine what Elizabeth went through? Poor Betty, trying to live a good life, trying to love God and love her husband, and for years and years and years, praying every year, maybe this will be the year. And poor Zach, going to work every day, trying to provide for his wife, and trying to live good before God and before man, and trying to do all the duties that a good priest does, and praying, for maybe every time he passed the altar, praying, oh God, just give me a son, just give me a child, God. And wondering what it must have been like for them. This must have been hard. And sometimes you wonder, and I guess my point with this story, this part of the story is that life's not fair. Life's not fair. And our fantasies don't always come true the way we expect them to be. No doubt when they got married, the plans that they had, no doubt they had painted a beautiful picture of a nice home with lots of children and all those kinds of things, and it just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. And how many couples today go through life and they get married and they have this vision of what my marriage is going to look like. And what if it doesn't happen that way? What if something doesn't work out? Maybe they have a vision of a certain income level they're going to have, or a certain kind of house they're going to live in. Or maybe she feels that her Prince Charming is always going to be the Prince Charming that he was when they were courting together. Maybe he feels like she is always going to be the wonderful beauty queen and the wonderful woman that she was when they were dating. And everything is going to be wonderful, and they're going to have the perfect job and the perfect neighborhood. And all of these things happen. But the fact of the matter is, in life, sometimes things break. And sometimes you can't explain why. Sometimes you just can't do it. And you can be as godly as Betty and Zach were. And still, sometimes life is disappointing. Sometimes life can be very painful. And so my question is, I would love to be able to sit down with Betty and Zach someday in heaven and say, how did you do that? How did you treasure one another for all those years? How did you, because it says in verse 7 that they continued to live righteously and blamelessly before God. What a wonderful couple they must have been. What was it that kept them so together? What was it that even in the middle of one of the worst disappointments they could possibly face, what was it that kept them together, not only enduring but thriving? They had a wonderful witness in the community. That people saw them as this wonderful couple, and they were honest and righteous before God, and in all of their relationships. They were the cream of the crop, and they didn't let this disappointment destroy them. That's my point. They didn't let the fact that this unfair thing that happened, they didn't allow it to wipe them out. And I believe that is a thing I would like to be able to sit down with Betty and Zach and say, listen, how did you do that? How did you not allow this to shape you? How did you keep doing that? And I wonder what they would tell us. I wonder what kind of things they would say about that. You know, I don't know what their secret was exactly. I don't know exactly how they dealt with that, how they faced that. I know that it probably had a lot to do with faith. It had a lot to do with understanding that there is a God in heaven who has a plan and a purpose, and their commitment to Him. I remember when Mary and I first got married, and one of the things that we said to one another is that when we get married, we are not going to be committed to a perfect marriage. We're going to be committed to each other. Now, you think about that for a minute. A lot of times when people get married, they have this ideal of what they want to have happen, what they expect to take place. And they get committed to that. And they think, man, this is what I'm living for. This is what I'm marrying for. This is the whole package. And I want the package. I want it just like this. But then when they step into life and life begins to bang them around, life begins to kick and pull and tug and surprises come, they begin to have to back up and say, wait a minute, I'm not getting the package. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I signed up for. So what do? You know, if I've made a commitment to a certain way of living, and that way of living falls apart, then where does my commitment go? But if I make a commitment to God, no matter what comes, and I make a commitment to that wonderful, wonderful woman that I married, no matter what comes, then regardless of what the package is, I'm committed to her, not to a set of circumstances. I'm committed to the God who loved us enough to bring us together. The God who is so wonderful that He believes in this wonderful idea of bringing couples together and creating one flesh. To show us, you know what He does that to show us? Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 5, is to show us Christ in the church. Christ's great love for His church. You see, when Christ looks at His church, He loves her. You know, people talk today so much about what's wrong with the church and so many problems with the church, and they're right. When Jesus looks into the eyes of His bride, the church, He sees her spotless and flawless. He loves her, even with all the crazy stuff we do, even with all the nonsense that goes on within our walls, within our fellowships. He loves us because He's committed to His church. Isn't that good to know today? Isn't it good to know that Jesus Christ is committed to you? He's absolutely committed to you no matter what happens. He's committed to you no matter how well you perform. How well, what good you know, some of you came in this morning with a great attitude. Some of you came in here with a stinking attitude. You know what? He loves you just the same. Because that's just who you're His. You're His bride. And this is the way, this is the kind of thing that when I come into marriage, of what I need to do is come in and say, I am committed to two things. I'm committed to the God who brought us together, and I'm committed to the person that I am becoming one with. I'm committed to that person, even when life begins to disappoint us, even when that big, beautiful castle never arrives, and the big white horse falls over and dies, and all those kind of things happen. Listen, let me tell you something. One of the most dangerous things you're ever going to do at your wedding, I'm going to tell you the most dangerous part of your wedding. You ready? Y'all ready? Those of you that are getting ready to get married, I'm going to tell you. There's a dangerous thing that's going to happen at your wedding. You're going to be asked to say some vows. You know what a vow is? It's not just a promise. It's not a contract. A vow is a deep commitment to God. That's what it is.